Head over to miniaturemarket.com where they have thousands of board games at discounted prices, and you can sign up for product alerts. Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. You're about to see my Allegro 1-minute overview and final thoughts. This is designed to see if this game warrants more of your time. If it does, just keep watching because then you'll see my full intro overview and final thoughts. However, if you don't want to be spoiled anything and you want to skip right to the full review, use the time index below in YouTube. Brick and Mortar is an economic game for 2 to 4 players where you'll be having your stores in your storefront, buying and selling different goods, messing with supply and demand, and undercutting players secretly with your prices and quantities. Over the course of the game, you're building up your storefront with different stores, and those stores are going to be holding different types of goods. Each player is going to be able to manipulate the supply and or the demand secretly each round, which will tell you how many new goods of each type will be coming out and how many will be able to be sold. If there's not enough supply, you'll be needing to secretly bid as how much you're willing to pay to stock your shelves. And if there's not enough demand for those products, you'll need to commit quantity and price trying to undercut your competition. You'll also be spending that money you make on new stores and utility costs. But you'll also be spending that money to get points, which is the main way you win in the game. So let's see if you have what it takes to manipulate the markets, supply and demand, undercut your competition, and know when to buy the right amount of points. Brick and Mortar is a deep thinking economic game that is quite intuitive because it works like real life. You're influencing supply and demand secretly and doing different things with it. It's a cutthroat competitiveness of trying to cut the legs out of your opponents underneath them. It's brutally bloodbath, but it's a lot of fun. Sometimes the abilities of the stores are tipping you off to their strategy so you can sometimes understand what they're doing. You're looking for combos and getting buildings that work well together, and you're buying and selling for either points or trying to influence turn order. I love that they give you balancing stores and has a different feel with different player counts, more open with 2, more of a bloodbath with 4. It can be too punishing for some. There are lots of little rules to keep track of with just in the stores, but it's also what makes the game so great. You might need a timer during figuring out how much to sell things for, and I'd love to see rules about negotiating here. Overall, fantastic, pleasant surprise from a first-time designer, and I got a Saxophone Serenade. Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today we're opening up brick and mortar stores and selling things like food and shirts and electronics and art and jewelry. We're also going to be viciously undercutting our competition by messing with supply and demand, mostly secretly. Today we're going to take a look at Brick and Mortar. This is an economic game. Let me show you how it's played. I'll see you on the other side. In Brick and Mortar, it is an economic game where you're trying to have the most points and you'll be making money by buying and selling different types of goods, having different stores in your storefront, and also messing with supply and demand and changing quantity and price, trying to undercut other players. Let's show you a little deeper of how this works. Now the game is played over multiple rounds depending on the amount of players, and you're trying to get to a certain amount of points also depending on the amount of players. Now the game is played over multiple phases, and again, over the course of the game you're going to be buying and selling different types of goods like food, clothing, electronics, jewelry, and art. At the beginning of the game, you're going to start with a board and a single special starting store, but over the course of the game, you're going to be adding stores to this by purchasing them or auctioning for them, similar to Power Grid, and you'll be filling up different storefronts as the game goes on. This is how your board will look maybe around the 3rd or 4th round of the game. And adding or removing buildings is the first thing you do each round. Then you go to the advertising phase where each player has 5 market cards. You'll be placing one behind your shield, face up if you want it to be a supply because you're going to be supplying goods to the market, and then face down for the goods that there's going to be demand to sell for the market. Everyone's doing this. You can split them up 1 and 1, supply and demand, or put them both in supply or both in demand, for example. So after building and doing advertising like we just did, we're going to move to the supply step where we're going to supply the market based on the cards that players put down because you're influencing supply and demand every round. Now since you're in the middle of the game, there might have already been goods out at these different stores, but let's just say it was blank. All the supply cards that were face up behind players' shields will come out and will supply the stores. For example, food, we see 1, 2, 3, 4 food. And so we'd put those there and we'd do the rest for the supply, adding them to each of the stores for their corresponding goods. But then as part of the supply round, we're going to stock stores, starting with food and moving left. So here we see there's 4 food available for everybody as supply this round. Now here I have room for 2 food, regardless of which shelf I put it on, and that's it for here. which would be these two, which leaves 2 left for all other players. If there's enough food out here so that all these go to all the other players and everyone is completely full, then that's the oversupply. You get to buy them at the minimum price of $1. But let's say there's 4 food available, but there's like 6 slots amongst all players, meaning there's not enough food to go around. Well, you're going to be secretly bidding for how much you're willing to pay, knowing that the max that you're going to be able to sell these for are $6. So maybe I set mine for $3, and I'll put this face down. Once everybody's ready, we reveal. And starting with a player who is willing to spend the most will take as much food as they want that will fit in their stores. Now, much like Power Grid, a very good economic game, turn order is very important in this game. Whoever's in the lead is at first in turn order. Who's ever last is in last in the turn order, but sometimes being last in turn order is great, just like in Power Grid, because when you're buying and selling, if it's a tie, you go bottom to top. So sometimes you'll be manipulating turn order to be able to break ties in your favor. So let's say someone else actually bid more than my $3. They bid 4 and they took 2 of them, and I was left for my 2. Great, I got them, but the players below me that also wanted food, that didn't bid enough, they didn't get any this round. Now you do the same for all the other ones, left to right. No, you look at the minimum prices, go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 7 to 10, selling for up to as much as 6, 8, 12, 18, or 25. So it gets more and more expensive, but these goods are less and less prevalent and they're there less frequently throughout the game. But you do that for all of them. Then you'll reveal the demand from the market. These are all the face-down demand cards players put behind their shields. Then you go to the sale phase where you'd see what the demand was. These are all the face-down cards that players may have put in their demand section behind their shield. So for example, there's a whole demand of 4 plus 3, so 7 clothing could be sold. 3 art, which is rare because those things are harder to come by. 1 jewelry, 2 food, and 5 total electronics. So again, we go left to right, but now we're gonna be selling. For example, food. There's only 2 spots, 2 buyers of food. Now I've got 2 food, that's great, I wanna sell them both. But guess what? If there's more than 2, which is the demand, well, we're gonna have to decide quantity and price. How many we're willing to sell at what price? Now with this total demand of 2, if there was only up to 2 from all players that were ready to possibly sell, you'd automatically just sell them for $6 a piece. That's great. But in this case, we have some competition because there's only room to sell 2 of them, and there's more than 2 owned by any or all the players. And this is where this game gets brutal because you have to absolutely commit a certain quantity. Like in this case, I'm saying both of them I'm gonna sell or get rid of. I'll show you in a minute. And let's say the max price is $6, maybe I put $4. But guess what? If I get undercut, I'm gonna get hosed. Let's say we did this and another player instead sold 2 for less, because they're going to be selling it for less money. They're going to be getting more people to buy it because people want it because it's cheaper. So if we get undercut and we're not able to sell these, because we actually committed to, it doesn't matter. We have to get rid of this much in surplus. I have to remove these from my board from here for good. I've just lost that and I get nothing for it. It's brutal. But instead, let's say I undercut them. I sold both of them for $2. They had said 3. I get to sell both of these for $2. I doubled my money, but it's not making huge money, but they had to commit and get rid of stuff that they had committed. Maybe you just bluff. Maybe you put 0 quantity because you don't want to sell anything. You just mess with people. Sometimes, in rare instances, you might actually sell these for a 0 price just because it's going to totally hose somebody else up on an ability that they're about to take advantage of. And again, you'd do that for each of these left to right. Then you'd go down to inventory, where anything that you didn't sell goes down a different spot on the shelf. And if they're ever on the bottom when they get here, they go out of your store, they've expired, and they go back to the supply. Now you gotta keep the power on, so the next thing is to pay for utilities. And here we add up utility costs of the store and for where it is on your building. So here we have 4, 5, 6, 4 more is 10. I owe $10 just to keep my shops running. Now, anytime you need to spend money in the game, if you don't have enough, you can take debt, but it's not great because it's worth minus points at the end of the game and you can't get rid of debt. Then we go to investment. Now here, players in turn order can buy or sell points. You can buy points, I think it's $4 for a point, 9 for 2. It goes up and up each time. It really starts costing more, and most of the time you're gonna be buying in this smaller area because it's a little more efficiently, but you're trying to buy points each round too, but you need money next round to buy stores, auction off stores, pay for goods, things like that. So you gotta figure it out, very much like Power Grid in that regard. You might be selling points. You know what? We're all tied here. I might sell a point for $3. I'll get $3, I'll go down on points. Why would you want to do that? Well, you want to influence turn order because sometimes, again, having the ties can be a huge thing in this game. Then we will go back to a new round where players are going to be looking at different buildings to buy. Now this is interesting because players start with, you can draft cards at the beginning of the game and you can just buy them and play them from your hand, like for $12. Or you can auction them off and say, I want this one for 12, and you go through like a power grid type auction where the highest bidder will be able to buy it, and then if they buy this one, this comes down and a new one flips up. You can see what's coming, but you can only buy these 4. At the end of the round, the oldest one, like 1, 2, 3, 4, will get discarded and the rut will slide. But if nobody buys one of these in a round, they all go away. This is important because the abilities in this game is really the flavor and the depth of the game. By comboing these abilities together is really what makes this game shine. For example, let's just look at some of these stores here. This one says if you sell 4, which is mean the maximum, you'll get an additional 2 points. That's kind of cool. That's a pretty basic one. This one is if you sell them from your pawn shop, you actually lose money or $5 less than you normally would sell it for. But if you let these things expire, you can return them to the market and gain $2 per each one you return. That's very thematic of a pawn shop. You could just let all these expire. I'd get 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 if they all come off there. Not bad. The Art Liquidator, when you close the store, +3 for each one you discard. So I could fill this up with 2 of them, that's the max. I can get rid of them for a total of 6 points. There's all sorts of different things, and a lot of times you're buying stores that combo off of other stores, but you're also trying to watch out for monopolies. Don't want other players just to be able to just sell for max. There's a lot of strategy in this game. And in the round that somebody gets at least to the end game marker, that will be the end. Whoever has the most points at the end is the winner. Yeah, I tend to be a fan of economic games, and so I come into this with that bias of generally liking economic style games. Now this one was a smaller Kickstarter. I think it raised, I don't know, $30,000 or $40,000 on Kickstarter. So it's a small little game that I'm hoping to bring more attention to because I've really enjoyed it. Spoiler. This game has a distinct art style that looks really cool. It's kind of cartoony, but it all fits. I like the way the graphic design, the art style here is good. This is a deep thinking economic game that is pretty intuitive to how real life works with supply and demand. I like that because the mechanisms aren't crazy overbearing. Everything sort of makes sense, and it's just very deep. Lots of things to think about in this game. The best part is you're influencing supply and demand, and the flexibility of getting different cards of types of demand and supply and stores and all that. And messing with that supply and demand is really the crux of this, because it's like, hey, you could put your cards all on supply, all on demand, split them up, and players don't get to see what the demand's going to be until after they've bought stuff for supply, because in real life, you don't know what it's going to be. You think you might know, but the whole aspect of like looking at what's out there, looking at what stores players have out there, trying to influence things, looking at how much room you have in your stores, trying to get things, it's such an interesting thing because like if there's an oversupply, well, yeah, that's great, right? You're going to get all this stuff for the minimum cost, but it's not great because that typically means smaller margins because there's going to be less demand than all the stuff that's out there, and players are going to be undercutting each other, which means the one that actually does sell those things is going to be selling it for a smaller margin, where you're kind of looking more for ways to like get a smaller amount of things, but selling for the maximum amounts and get monopolies going, or having combos in your stores that allow you to do different things, that allow you to do things that are you might not normally do. Like instead of selling them, you just want them to expire so you can get points that way. Lots of different ways to skin the cat in this game. From the basics of this game, it's such an easy game to grasp with the supply and demand. And if it was just that, the game would be good. But adding in all these different strategies and combos you try to figure out with these stores really makes this game sing. This game has the cutthroat competitiveness of setting your dials and totally messing people over. Either buying things for way more than you should, undercutting, cutting people out of the deal, or undercutting the competition and making them commit and get rid of all their stuff, whether they sell it or not because of surplus. This game is brutal. If you don't like punishing economic games where you can totally hose over another player, this game's not for you. But most of the time you can kind of see that coming. If you look at their stores, you see what they have for supply, you see what demand's out there, you know what their abilities of their stores do, you know what yours do. You have an idea. You look at the churn order, which is very important of what happens when ties. You can usually guess when you're going to get undercut, and maybe you just sit out that round, right? I'm going to wait another round, right? But the lower and lower the older and older your goods get, the more and more, you get desperate to sell those things. It's such a great mechanism, but it can be very punishing. At the right time, it's really fun to stick it to your opponents. When it happens to you, it hurts. So just don't go in this game can be really punishing, but I really liked it. You're always looking at the store abilities, and these things are going to be tipping you off to not only your strategies, but other players' strategies. But you're also looking at the different stores, right? And these things are changing, and the interactions are changing. I like that you're flushing the market looking for combos. So if no one buys one at all, 4 new ones come out because those weren't helping players. If at least one buys one, just the oldest one goes out. It keeps the stores moving, keeps things interesting, because the combos, again, is really not the nuts and bolts of the game, but the seasoning to the game that makes this game really taste so well. I like that you're buying or selling points for turn order. Turn order is so important in this game, just like in Power Grid, where it's like, well, you get to buy them first if you're first, but you get to, tiebreakers break lowest to highest. And a lot of times, most of the time, you're gonna be buying points, but sometimes you're selling those points just to move back one, to make a little money and get yourself in a position good for tiebreakers, because you know that what's gonna happen next round, you're gonna be in another fight with another buddy. And you're thinking, well, if I can at least tie them, I can undercut them. And sometimes that can be the difference in the game. I like that there's so many different ways to play the game. You could start with drafting stores, which is the main way to play. But I like it when rulebooks balance and they give you a sort of start. Hey, first game, play with this. I love that, because in this game, you'd have no idea what the heck you're drafting the first time you play it. The balanced, and they went through and balanced every player count. They've balanced which stores players start with, both in front and in their hands, and I love that. I wish more games would do that. And it works well. You know that you're going to have a balanced game, but right after your first game, start drafting those, because the drafting really lets you set up your combos earlier and get things going faster. This game has a different feel with different player counts. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not. For this, because of how polarizing I think how punishing this game is going to be, it's good that this game feels different with different player counts. With 4 players, this game is an absolute bloodbath. Almost every time there's going to be competition for either buying or selling, and you're going to be going to the dials. 2 players is the opposite. Much more open, feels a little bit more like a solo Euro style game, but there's still a ton of interaction, way more than most solo style Euro games, because you're still setting supply and demand. You're still messing with things, but you're kind of a little bit more open. You won't be competing quite as often unless you purposely right off the bat start going after what each other's have. Then it's going to be a bloodbath 2-player. But with 2 players, there's less people going for things, so naturally you're going to be able to sell things for a little bit more. It's going to be a little bit open, but you will have those times where you do compete, and there's just enough of those to make the interaction really strong. So if you want that more open, less brutal game, 2-player game. If you want the absolute bloodbath, 4-player game, and 3 is literally right in the middle of the experience. So I like that you can sort of tailor that to the crew that you're playing with, or for which type of game that you like. On the negative side of thing, as I mentioned, this game can be brutally punishing, and it's going to be more punishing than some players are going to want sometimes. Again, you can kind of see it coming, and it's going to be your own fault, but it's hard to bounce back from just losing things that you committed because you weren't able to sell them. There are lots of little rules in this game. Most all of these are the combos and the abilities of the buildings, and those tend to be a little bit small text. If you're playing with 4 players, every player has 4 buildings out. 16 buildings, probably 12 of those have abilities on them. It's really hard to keep all those straight, because especially since a lot of what those abilities do are going to tell you what that player is going to possibly do on their turn when you're doing the dials. So you really have to keep track of where everything is, and a lot of those rules, some of them can be a little fiddly. But at the same time, again, that is what makes this game great, are those abilities. So it's both a positive and negative here, but it adds a little fiddliness to the game that is otherwise very streamlined. But again, it's also what makes the game so great too. So you kind of live and die by the sword there. This game, another thing is, you might need a timer during the selling part of this, because sometimes, again, you're looking at abilities, you're looking at what they might be doing, you're looking at everything over here, you're thinking hard, you're going like this, you're doing math in your head. You might need, with some groups, to set a timer during the selling phase as players figure out what they're going to set their dials to, because the game can go on long. It says 1 to 2 hours. You can play a 4 game that's under 2 hours. I have done that. 2-player game, you could play it in, I'd say, just over an hour if you both know what you're doing. The other thing is, I'd love to see rules in there about sort of table talk and negotiating. This game, the brutalness of it reminded me of one of my favorite negotiation games, actually, Tammany Hall, where you're like, hey, look, you and I are fighting over here, and we're going to be fighting later over here. How about I let you get this for, a lower price here, and you let me get this for a lower price over here? Okay, of course, not binding, right? And I could see this here. Hey, we're both in food, we're both in electronics. You know what? I'll let you sell all your food right now. Just sell it for the max price. I'll get out and you just go there. There's nothing in the rules that say what you can and can't do with negotiation. I wish there was some framework there. We just naturally talk about it and mess with everybody because we may or may not be doing what we're saying. But I would like to see the designers thought about what they think could or could not be said, and could you work out deals with each other in that way and things like that. I'd like to see what Nick says about this, the designer. First time designer. Earlier this year, or at the end of last year, this is a 2021 release, but I'm doing this in 2022. At the end of 2021, my game of the year was a very strong economic game that was a smaller Kickstarter. First time designer. Again here, smaller Kickstarter, first time publisher, first time designer, and it's fantastic. It's so great to see such thriving new designers hitting it out of the park with their first designs. And I must say, if I played this before the end of last year, this game would have made my top 10 games of the year. That's how highly I think about this game. So naturally, I'm keeping it in my gaming library, and it's getting a Saxophone Serenade, so let's hit it. Game Toppers not only transforms your existing table to a high-quality gaming solution, they now offer full leg kits and dining cover solutions for the full table application. Paired with their amazing thematic premium stitch edge mats from noted board game artists like Vincent Dutray, collapsible cup holders, and really cool accessories, it's a complete system that upgrades every game you play. Go to GameToppersLLC.com or click the link below.